Remember, we do it cheaper or we do it free. And remember, it doesn't come any cheaper than that. We appreciate those commercial words from the Navarro brothers. More in the continuing day and night saga of acts and facts. You could say, from a certain kind of view, that the purpose of some facts is to draw man's attention away from too close a scrutiny of acts. Should we here say to draw man's attention away from too close a scrutiny of certain facts? Should we say that? Is that necessary? I'm sorry, I'm still doing the Navarro brothers. A lot they know. Could it be that to ordinary thinking, almost any act can be too disturbing, too disruptive, too corruptive to be properly faced? That it could be too disturbing for a kind of proper acceptance, a kind of proper etiquette being displayed while one stands in the proper place in the abreuvoir queue. I guess I better go back and repeat it based upon the almost blinding swarm here, not of locusts but of silence. Could it be that facts are to draw man's attention away from too close a scrutiny of acts? And then we went through, should we say, of certain acts, but you were supposed to drag your own little mind along behind the wagon and go, well, no, that's true. There could be certain acts that are so disturbing, like to an ordinary man to think about death, and then he thinks about facts, like, well, yeah, but that's okay because I gave some big bucks to the church, and therefore, some way I'll get out of this. And then I said, you're still supposed to be dragging it along. What if all acts have the potential to be so disturbing as to require facts? You understand how it went? Bumpity, bumpity, bump, either up, down, or sideways with your wagon behind you. But, well, wait a minute. Because I was assuming the reason I went through this little ha-ha dramatic bit was that you were supposed to on your own when I said that we could ask the rhetorical question or make the suggestion that facts could be for the purpose of keeping man's attention, to keep man from too closely studying, watching, scrutinizing acts. And then you were supposed to go, well, that's pretty weird. Of course, those of you who've been around, that's not real weird, but you might think, well, that's, to start off the evening, that's as obtuse as anything. And then you were supposed to listen up a minute, and I said, well, what if we said, or maybe we should think that it's necessary to add certain acts, that facts are to keep man from too close a scrutiny of certain acts. And then you were supposed to go, well, that could be now. Not just death, it could be all sorts of things. It could be driving down the highway and there's a horrendous car wreck and you go by and you can't help it and you see somebody with their head half severed off out the window, and your facts may be, well, they can do miracles nowadays with microsurgery. And then you drive on by. Now see, you could have done that. That's what you were supposed to do. And then, me playing my part in this tango, then I was supposed to jump back in and say, but yeah. What if almost any act could be seen to be too potentially disruptive to one's normal position and proper etiquette that you should be displaying in your submissive place there in the great slaughter parade. And then you're supposed to yourself go, boy, this wagon's getting heavy. And then you're supposed to sit down and go, and wait for Rodin to come by. I never could understand how a monster like that, with those big old things, could get down and make those little cute sculptures. But now that JV's free, I guess he'll tell us. Well, since we've covered that, let me take it further. Now play like that you got two wagons, one in each hand. That we had that little respite there with a small amount of humor. I'll admit it was a child's portion. But since some of you are going to go hungry in dreamland, so now imagine that you have rested for a second and you have a wagon in both hands. And try and sort of non-focus, not but non-focus your thinking, and ponder the possibility that all words are a special sort of euphemism. We could take another side step. I can't resist a definition. I was going to say words, all words, and then slash or parentheses, facts, since we're still dealing with that wagon train of acts and facts. I was going to give you another definition. Words. What do they have in the dictionary after the word? A dash or colon? Words. Facts with feet. Well, they can get out and get about on their own. Like facts are almost stay-at-homes. But you put facts in words, by God, it's a lot better than having a teenager with your car keys. Facts, once they're put in words, you can say, you can kiss them goodbye. And you and your wife can use the downstairs couch in front of the fireplace as God intended it. Plus, you don't have to answer all these stupid questions all your life. But see, give facts some feet, turn them into words, and they are out of here. But back to, I was asking you to take both hands strongly, securely on your little wagon handles, and start back either up, down, or sideways on the stairs. And ask yourself, is it possible that all words are a special sort of euphemism? And everybody knows what euphemisms are, don't they? Except perhaps the Navarro brothers. But when you're in the business they're in, you do not have to know such things. And don't ask me what you do have to know to be in their kind of business, because they do not need partners at this time. Euphemism, how about if all words are a special sort of euphemism? Being more pleasant terms for more unpleasant acts. This is a manifold version of where we were starting, to consider that all words in a very specific way might be euphemisms. But notice, we're not using euphemism in its normal sense, because euphemism is using one word to replace another word. A more acceptably pleasant word to replace a less pleasant word. Such as, the words passed away, bought the farm, rather than died. But that's easy enough. What if all words are a special sort of euphemism? Not for other words, for acts that every word is a more, and I assume that you'll do it in your own brain, put parentheses and all sorts of little lines around pleasant and unpleasant. But that all words might be euphemisms for acts. And notice then you would have a unsuspected multi-tier progression beyond what the dictionary and what the ordinary thinking would tell you. It's not just then a euphemism. It's not just taking an unpleasant word such as it doesn't come much better than death and deceased or passed away. You can say tipsy. Last night I was perhaps a little tipsy, as opposed to last night I was shit-faced. We could stand here, and you can do it on your own, and you could take almost every word, I would suggest, at no great purpose, but you could take almost every word that would seem to be based upon the secondary behavior of man, those kinds of passionate activities, thoughts, and in some way you could pick out, I would suggest, many, perhaps a great majority, if not all, of ordinary words and say, well, now, in one sense, this word is a euphemism. Making love instead of what. That it's the same thing, but it sounds better because of this and that, because of contemporary mores, because of the prevailing attitudes, because of the way people use this particular word. So you could say that there is one ordinary progression. There is one operational function of words. Were it not so, there would not be such a word as euphemism. Or if there was such a word, it would not be in the dictionary. But it is, and they are. But they are and there is. So you have that progression. There, in one sense, civilization could even be seen. I don't know how far we can wander off the trail here and still keep anybody's attention, but you could even say civilization is a continuing attempt. Take the good old cartoon version of evolution. One caveman gets horny, and gets real horny and looks at this woman. And she's with this other guy, this other caveman. He looks at her and he looks at him and he goes, "Nah." God knows what it meant. But after a while, it gets around. Because the fact of this, what he did is followed by the act, perhaps. He goes, "Nah." And then the next time this other caveman's head's turned, the one that went, jumps her. So the second guy, being no idiot, he catches on that means, you better watch your woman. So then even she understands, she hears, at least from this guy, and she realizes, I'm in for double your pleasure, double your fun. She's one of the double mint twins without having an actual twin. But then, so it goes, let's assume, and then it goes from because that gets to be, as you might imagine at that level, that gets to be somewhat of a touchy word among some people. Especially if you're one of the ones that's got a woman and this other guy, you just stand there minding your own business, sitting around the cave, and you hear this, and you realize he's here and he's about to go. So then it gets into, it goes from that to, would you like to dance? Or the first caveman, since when becomes, everybody gets real uptight, very defensive, then it worked its way into, hi, what's your sign? That sort of thing. The whole point of this being, you could see I was trying to get you to see that in a quite real sense. I wasn't going to stop here because it's pretty crude, but it might help some of you get your eyeballs non-focused in a particular manner. You could actually see civilization as being a continuing attempt to come up with new euphemisms. That is, in a sense, at least a verbal schematic of the great march of civilization. But now back to where we were on the main trail with no markings. What if all facts, remember facts being synonymous with words, what if all facts, all words are special euphemisms, not for other words, but for acts? But then there's a query that I would ask: who could describe growth, change in a full manner without making some note that all growth, all change becomes an unpleasant act to someone? And since John McLaughlin's not here, I'll answer it for you. No one! That's who. Because if you are going to detail in any full manner, this honest, reflective manner, change and growth, then you would have to make some note right along the way, right in the midst of all of your observations and sketches. You would have to make note that all growth, all change, being acts we're talking about now, will become unpleasant to someone. And you do not have to go out and put ads in the paper. You do not have to go out on some expedition looking for grunions. All you got to do is see change going on. By anybody's definition, again, we're speaking about ordinary sane people, is what I mean by a full, honest observation and acknowledgement that change and growth is going on in some place. So any ordinary sane person sees it. He does not have to go looking far. If change is going on, someone there, right at the site, finds it unpleasant. Martha, isn't a boy, he's getting grown now. I mean, he's so much more adult than he was, so much better. Yeah, but he's going to leave home. Well, now after all these years, I've graduated from body and fender school, and I feel like maybe I'll make my mark in life. And this little woman looks at him and smiles, and he says, and by the way, later for you, he's going to improve himself. I was trying to give you crude examples, but seeing as tight as some of you people's lips are, you've already been through all that, hadn't you? Anyone noticing we have not changed the subject for me asking, could you consider the fact that all words, everything that's said, might be a special sort of euphemism, not for other words, for acts themselves. And euphemism being a more pleasant retelling of something that was less pleasant. So now, I was going to make it a real mathematical presentation, but since all of life is by anybody's, any sane city view, all of life is change and growth, or else it's not alive. That all change and growth, you do not have to look within change and growth and think, well, is it possible that somewhere in this is some unpleasantness? Open your eyes. That was the query about, what do you mean, is it possible? Is it possible for it not to be? And the answer is no! Thank you, John. There is no way that progress can be seen. There is no way that any factual, that is wordy, notation may be made about the viable existence of life, that it's actually alive, it and people. You could not make a full report of it to yourself without making specific notation that someone in the midst of any scenario that you picked out, someone is finding it unpleasant. It is natural. It is not that some of the people involved are being unpleasant. It's not that some of the people involved are being uncivil. It is the acts that are unpleasant. Now back, how about this? Since everyone still believes that all parades turn on themselves, pick up at their own rear end, even though they don't. Back to where we started. Could it be that the purpose of some facts is to draw man's attention away from too close a scrutiny of facts. Not certain facts, we went through that. Go ahead and mark that out. I'll put in parentheses like to keep him from too close a scrutiny of facts. And then after that you can put parentheses, certain facts, maybe question mark, and then into parentheses. And then after you do that, draw a line through it. Looked at another way for you mathematical Navarro offsprings. If you did note anything that seemed to be alive in life, if you could note an instance, something other than the fleeting, hey buddy, what time is it? 4:15, thanks. Other than that, if there is some interchange of energy, some dance going on, twixt two people or more, something alive, energetic, if it's going on and you could look at it with a full, good eyesight, find nothing to them, to the participants, that you could see that none of them found anything unpleasant, I would suggest to you that what you would be observing would be a funeral. And don't tell me that people cry at funerals. I've heard that. Doesn't matter, because you would be observing someone who had paid off the full purchase price of a rural area. You would be discussing you would be observing what would seem to be a dance, a relationship, an energy exchange between two or more peoples that could be best defined as that sort of suit. You can get them cheap. That was the converse, that was the backup at the end of the parade, that there is no such thing as the observation of anything alive, any dance, any interchange, any transfer of words between people that is not making someone feel unpleasant. You got to face it. You've got to see it. If you begin to see that, then everything that your old intellect tells you, all the complaints, all the cynicism, all the smart-ass remarks, all the opposition, all the whining, all the compassion that you feel for other people's stupidity, which is always reflected in their facts, their words, you understand you got to get a new hobby, because it's a cover-up. They're engaged in euphemisms, and that includes, does it? Yes, those who have never heard the bloody word. Those that even you might try to describe what a euphemism meant, and they might go, after some length of time, go, wait a minute, you mean one word and you say another, and you say, yeah, and they walk off thinking, I always heard about intellectuals, I'm glad I aren't one. What could be stupider than that to a straightforward thinking person? You mean a euphemism is you want to say one thing, right? And you got the word, yeah, but then you use another word instead of that word, right? And they go away, figuring that you really like baseball a lot. That being, for those of you who don't know, a sport slow enough for intellectuals to understand. Well, baseball is not actually, the joke goes that why do intellectuals like baseball so much? It's the only sport that goes slow enough that intellectuals can understand. That's not really it. I guess on an organized basis, but intellectuals actually have their own private physical sport, and that's throwing rocks and hitting the ground. That's their real favorite. That's intellectuals' real favorite. So I've been told. I don't know. Well, let's try another slant. Put it to you as a query again. Is the unpleasantness that is everywhere, don't defend whining and etc., unpleasantness is, in someone's view, unpleasantness is wherever life exists. Because if life exists, it is growing. And if it is growing and changing, someone in the equation, someone in that dance, wherever you look, no matter who the people are, someone finds it unpleasant. Whether it be for a second, a minute, it's simply there. The new query was, is the unpleasantness from acts, from the real acts, or is it from the collateral facts, the descriptions that must always accompany acts? I don't believe, or at least don't accept your belief, that I had already answered that 2 minutes ago. Just try and consider it on the basis that I'm asking it anew. Consider it a new paragraph. Is the unpleasantness that is simply there? And of course, that's just a word. It's just a euphemism. I don't want to tell you what the reality is. But this unpleasantness that everyone finds, that you find it unpleasant if your mate, if your mother says, well, I've been a widower now, or a widow for 40 years, and I've decided to marry this 19-year-old dance teacher over that I met at Fred Astaire studio, and we're going to move to Montana, and I'm taking all my money with me. And she says, and I feel much better. I feel better than I have in years. And you love your dear mama, but for several reasons that we could guess, you would find her declaration to be, may I say, tinged with a certain amount of unpleasantness. Even though she is benefiting, that she looks to be the rose of health for someone 102 years old. So we've already established that there's always unpleasantness to some participant, to some very close observer, to someone who would consider themselves, if asked, even if it's just a look, someone around the accident scene, the dance floor, the situation, someone around the area that would consider themselves in some way involved, influenced by it, will find parts of it. Without any doubt, for some length of time, they'll find parts of it unpleasant. Now take that. It's just, it is. But now the new query, without thinking I'd already answered it now. Please don't. I wouldn't be doing it like this. Is the unpleasantness, you may make hand gestures and go, actually? How about that? Is the unpleasantness actually from the acts, or does it arise from the facts? And of course, there are always facts to every act, or they would not be even recognizable. And it's not even worthy of any new thinking to start that kind of debate. Well, do acts exist if there are no facts? You know, if a lexicographer falls in a forest and no one's there, will they hear him trip? It is simply for the operational purposes of a reasonable operating intellect. Acts must have descriptive facts to accompany them, or they don't exist. They have their own effect, etc., but they do not exist to anyone that we could point to. If there is no accompanying fact, if there's no description of it, the act is operationally inoperative to you, using you generically. So, I repeat one more time, is the unpleasantness in any situation, regardless of my funny ones, or at least you laughed, is the unpleasantness that is always inherent even in situations that from many views would seem, or many overall views would seem to be laudable, progressive, but from some view of some participant, someone so close to it that they are directly affected and will respond, someone is going to find it unpleasant. Is that unpleasantness actually arising from the act, or is it birthed by the inescapable collateral facts that always go along with it? I have, God knows, we have expended 10 or 15 calories with the, because if you consider, may I suggest again that this can have an unsettling, in the sense of shaking up a muddy pond and then wondering how in the hell could someone pick up a whole pond But then you can look at the bottom. What this can do, the way in which you think, is ask yourself, because we're not interested in other people. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot we're on tape. Yes, we are. Be sure and send your postcards in supporting other people. By God, we're all in favor of them. It's here. It's here in you. Everything is unpleasant. And we're not talking about primary unpleasantness. We're not talking about if right now you're hearing this and you're standing in a 50-gallon drum of boiling oil. If you are, you didn't ask my opinion, I'd say get out. Or if you have wandered into a cage with a horny rhinoceros and he's beginning to eyeball you and ask you what your sign is, I'd get out. So we're not talking about unpleasantness on the primary basis. We're talking about the kind of unpleasantness that civilized people, as they should, take very seriously. Because civilized people do not take seriously any of the 3S problems of sex and sustenance and shelter. Not an average civilized person. You don't sit around worrying about, do I have to go through this again? Should I get in out of the rain and protect all my clothes and belongings and my health? Should I go out and eat? That's ridiculous. It's not pleasant, it's not unpleasant, just a sane person without any particular facts will look after the primary needs. So we're not talking about any sort of primary unpleasantness. I know what happens. But if it happens, just always remember, Dr. Youngman, it hurts when I do this. Well, don't do that. There's the answer to all so-called primary unpleasantness. And if you can't do it, go pay somebody, just take a jack or a hoist and pull your arm down, or to hit it and break it so it'll fall down. They're known as what? Doctors, body and fender men, whichever's cheapest. So the unpleasantness of that sort is not even worthy of any more discussion. If you're so wired up that it is, then I don't know why you're watching this tape. You should be watching Dr. Ruth or the A-Team. If they'd bring it back, I can understand. To me, I have seen personally, I read that someone has plotted a very specific decline in the mental health of the American public since the A-Team went off. At any rate, you should see it's not a matter of unpleasantness with primary needs and concerns. You either take care of them or you go out and you join those who have paid off for the homestead. The unpleasantness that we're speaking of is the only unpleasantness that is actually of any operational significance to a sane, ordinary, modern man, and that is the area of secondary unpleasantness. Because you people do not sit around and you're not unpleasantly driven, affected by hunger, of being out in the elements. You're not homeless. You're not horning to death, except maybe that Navarro brother with the glasses. That is not modern man, average man problem. That is not his unpleasantness. The unpleasantness, of course, they arise from it, remembering that all facts follow acts. But it is now on the basis that all modern, sane, civilized, up-to-date, serious problems and unpleasantness are on the basis of facts. See, I answered it for you. But then my suggestion was, forget all that stuff out there, and all those people and horny rhinos and all that silly I don't know where that came. Is in here. Is your own brain. The only thing that you laughingly think of, if you're ordinary, as being yourself, its problems, its unpleasantness, is what? It's fact-based. And what if the parade started out, not only at pace, but correctly this evening, that all words might be euphemisms. All facts may be euphemisms, distractions for unpleasant acts and to keep you from looking at unpleasant acts. Do I have to wrap it up any cruder? What if all thinking, this is real crude, I didn't mean to get this crude, but what the hell? I got one of the Navarro brothers chewing on my cuff down here. What if all thinking is a form of distraction? Now I can stop Some of you should be able to do it yourself. Anyway, I can prove that. I can operationally speak, I can do it real quick, but we're really running out of time. You should be able to do it yourself. There is a way for your own quick, temporary, unfocused, non-focused reasons. It's got no permanent significance. But you could literally see for a second that that is a valid description, that all thinking is a form of distraction. Surely you can. But, all right, I will make it real crude. Looking at the institution of the large range of the March of Progress, if a man, stretching reality as we can do verbally, if we had a man, and we're going to make him into something else while he's still remaining what he is and being aware of it. If we had a man and he didn't get an intellect going, but remember, we're talking about somebody who already had an intellect going, but we're about to back up and go close to 5D to be able to pull it like a good old Mobus, the bottle. If the intellect didn't distract him in a certain way, he would experience no unpleasantness in life. Or, are you ready? Look at it another way. Life would be even more unpleasant, but you got to remember he'd be the same as he is, but now we've changed him. But he's still aware. There's no way this makes any cartographical sense. Cartological. Everything would be unpleasant if he didn't have the intellect to distract him. And don't write me or the Navarro brothers and say, well, those things are mutually exclusive. That's only if you're a blank. What if all of the operations of the intellect, in a sense, is to distract man? Now, you can take that after, if you get some glimpse of it, and you could freshen it up a bit, and say, what if it is to simply turn man's attention in a different direction? That sounds a bit better, doesn't it? That even sounded like, well, there might be some germ of truth in that. Thank you, thank you. What if it is to draw his attention somewhere else? Because if he were left simply a creature whose life was act-based, he wouldn't have but three places to look, more or less. Wouldn't have but three things to do in life. Three places to go, three places to not go, three places to go do something, then three places to leave after he'd done it, three things to think about, if he could think, which we're saying he couldn't, but if he could, he'd have three things to think about. He would only have three things to forget about. He would only have three things to not think about. If he thought, well, I don't want to think, then he'd only have three things not to think about. Very limited. But if you can think in the ordinary sense, you have an almost infinite field of distractions. You have an almost limitless number of ways to have your attention drawn from acts somewhere else. Oh, I know it can seem to be, well, it's almost the same thing, because this fact, this word, is a direct representation of that act, says he. Maybe. But note, once you have a word, once you have a fact, which you've got to have that going to exist, but once you have a fact, there is no way to directly or too closely to scrutinize the act. What if all the words, what if all the thinking is a form of necessary distraction? Anybody who's getting good, then we could say that we were using distraction as a euphemism. Ha 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 ha. I was waiting for that. Your wait was not in vain, was it? That means, I don't know. If you caught into that, I was going to say you are left then with that delightful revolutionist dance and dagger fight that's known, I think, around these here parts, partner, as the relief, the escape, the non-focused instruction of thinking more than you have to. because that is, amongst other possibilities, that would be a wrap on today's filming. Because if it were true, I'll run it down real quick. If it were true, as ridiculous, as frightening, as astounding, as silly, as humid as it may sound, the possibility that all facts are to draw man's attention away from acts, from certain acts, that all words are euphemisms, not for other words, but for acts. Still, in a special way, though, using euphemism is a more pleasant blanking, it's supposed to be telling, representation, a more pleasant representation of less pleasant acts. What if that's true? And then what if it is that all words are a distraction? Then, of course, it's one small step to what if all thinking is a really special kind of euphemism? That it's not possible to think in any way that is not euphemistic. That we are truly in the three-dimensional world at mutually exclusive loggerheads. That if you think, whatever your thinking process is at the ordinary level, it is euphemistic. No matter what you do, no matter what you say, no matter how truthful you have to be, try to be, no matter how blunt you appear to be, thinking itself can be seen as a kind of euphemism. Now, if all of that be true, and it was not so humid as to wilt those of you dressed in all woolens, then you're left with that delightful fall down with yourself and roll in the dirt approach that wraps it all up, and that is, well, if all that's true, it's simple. All I'll do is think more than I have to. When you've said that, you've said it all. Yeah. I will not give credit to the plagiarism of whatever television advertisement that came from. But if you think more than you have to, assuming that you understand in your own way the unsavory act for which that term is a euphemism, but if you think more than you have to, remember that's in quotation marks, and it's got periods in the front and the end, and it's in brackets, and you got to circle it because there's no way in, there's no way out. It's unconditional, there's nothing to talk about. You don't let yourself say, hey, write me, let's talk about this. You think more than you have to. If you do that, the rest of it goes and it is obviously non-focused because there is no position to take to start with. That would be the anathema. Of course, that being a euphemism for something much worse. But that would be the anathema of ordinary, reasonable, sane, focused thought and speech, which always has an object. And for someone even trying to become even more sane, more observant, that is, taking in new information. But to do so, there must be a focus to it, there must be a purpose to it. The methods must have some describable approach. But the little dagger of thinking more than you have to, there is no approach, there is no position, and all your ordinary mind can do, if for some reason it was in a weakened moment, eating cheap junk food and watching this kind of thing, and you suddenly try to consider me saying there's great potential seriousness to the idea, think more than you have to, and draw a circle around it, no conditions, you can't get in, put barbed wire around it, and then an ordinary person go, well, yeah, but exactly what does that mean? Screw you. That's what you got to say. I just said it. Yeah, but not just think more than you have to. Think more than you have to, and in what way? From what position? From what approach? That sounds good. I like it. None of us think enough, so I'm all for it. I'm on your side. Don't say screw me. I'm on your side. Think more than I have to. In what way? Jesus, screw you. Think more than you have to. Well, I'll think about it.